Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and we're going to be going over the absolute best stance combo in the game. And this isn't just my opinion or based on experience. I will be giving a lot of opinions, and I do have a lot of experience. But that being said, this is just an objective fact. There is no other stance combination that comes anywhere near this one, and if you disagree, you're wrong. So feel free to share your arguments otherwise in the comments section, but just remember that at the end of the day, it's already been established that you're wrong. This combination is, of course, as the title and thumbnail may have already told you, the double-bladed stance, which is obviously made famous through Darth Maul, and then later other Jedi like Pong Krell and other people would use the Saber staff, and of course lots and lots of really iconic famous people in what is now known as Star Wars Legends. But the double saber or the Saber staff is a lot of people's favorites, and so hopefully that won't piss you off too much. The combination or the other stance that goes with this one though is easily the dual wield stance. So this is one that again has been used by a ton of different Jedi throughout various forms of media. We see Starkiller wielding two sabers at times. We see Anakin doing it in Attack of the Clones. We of course famously see Ahsoka Tano doing it. We see Kit Fisto doing it. Lots of people have wielded two sabers. But that being said, this one is probably most closely modeled after Ahsoka, just given the fact that we have the distinct length differences in the blades, whereas with most of the other ones that we just see two full-length lightsabers. So, that being said, this combination goes together extraordinarily well. As much as you can make lots of other stances work together, this combination is by far the best with absolutely no weaknesses. Now that I've covered all of the core level surface facts about it, just a little bit about talking about why I like this combination so much and why it just seems to go together. One thing is that they flow so well. So both of these stances, you may be able to notice when just going through the basic moveset, is that they're both extremely fast-paced and fluid, so you don't really have a whole lot of a difference there. One of the jarring things about switching between, say, like the Saber staff and the crossguard stance, which is another pairing that I enjoy, is that the difference in the styles is so jarring because of the speed and the movement. This one doesn't have that at all. You can fluidly switch back and forth between the two without really even noticing a pacing difference. So that's the first reason why I love this combination. Another one is that, like I just showed multiple times, you can really easily, mid-combat, switch between the two without ever having to miss a beat, which is great because that's how they so perfectly match up for each other's weaknesses. Another great thing is that both of these stances are extremely mobile. So if you find yourself ever getting kind of pinned down in the battlefield or whatever the case may be, you can quickly move away while still dealing damage to your opponents with either of these stances. So if you're someone who doesn't like to constantly get hit or get backed into a corner, both of these stances work for that playstyle. Especially the dual wield stance where you can interrupt a combo at any point to block or parry, which is extremely important against lightsaber wielding enemies. And like I've already said multiple times, there are no weaknesses in this pairing. All saber stances except for the single bladed stance have at least one weakness, but if you pair these two together, there are no notable weaknesses just because they complement each other so perfectly. And what I mean by that is that the dual wielding stance is one of, if not the absolute best stance for dueling a single opponent, whether that opponent is just a regular mob type enemy, like a stormtrooper or a droid or a bounty hunter, or a high-level boss, like a, I don't know, Inquisitor, Darth Vader, the Rancor, anything like that. The dual-wielding stance just works so perfectly. Now, it's, of course, going to be most effective against saber-wielding or gun-wielding enemies, you know, humanoid-type enemies, as opposed to something like the Rancor, but I did defeat the Rancor relatively easily with the dual-wielding stance, and I know a lot of other people have struggled with it, so, like I said, it's super good against it. I would call it the best stance against a single opponent, but if not, it's definitely in the top two. And on top of that, the double-ended blade is the single best one against groups. And what I call a group in this game would be enemy, like 3 or more enemies at a time, and it is just so good in that setting. Now, mind you, the weakness there being that it's not as good against a single opponent. That being said, the way that they complement each other, and the reason I would put the Saber Staff as your primary, and the dual wielding as your secondary, is because the Saber Staff works better against a single opponent than the dual wielding stance works against multiple opponents. And so one of the things that you'll notice when using the dual wielding stance is how aggressive and quick you can be with it, because its main advantage is that you quickly wear down your enemy's stamina, which makes them basically just cannon fodder. But yeah, so like I said, the dual-wielding stance is easily the best one against single opponents, and the double-bladed stance or saber staff stance is the best against 3 or more opponents at a time. So you pair them together, and there's absolutely no weaknesses. But I would prioritize, I would say make the saber staff your primary weapon, and dual-wielding your secondary, just because the saber staff works better against single opponents than the dual wielding does against multiple opponents. So as far as skills go for this moveset combination, or build guide, I guess you could call it, obviously if you're going to be emphasizing dual wielding and double bladed, I recommend getting all of the skills for them. But that being said, there are certain ones that are of course more important than others, and I will highlight them here. So out of the dual wielding skill tree, the first one that you unlock is one of the most important ones. Obviously, you have to unlock it first, so it doesn't matter, but it is extremely essential, and that is the backstep slash. And so the backstep slash is where you hold LB and then you press X and you leap forward, do an attack, and then jump backward. Or I shouldn't say leap forward, but slightly go forward and then leap backward. It's great for a lot of things. One of the things is obviously dealing damage and then quickly getting yourself back out of combat. The other thing is you actually hit each enemy with this one. If you land all of them, you actually hit them 4 times, but 2 times with each blade. So it can be also extremely powerful. So the backstep slash is one that is super important to utilize in combat. The next one is focused parry. And so focused parry is a nice important one because it allows you to specifically time when you're going to release with your special force-based parrying ability, which is one of the greatest strengths of the dual-wielding stance. I utilize this one a lot, especially against larger opponents and opponents that use lightsabers, because I've never had it blocked. Every single time I've used this one, it's landed and done a lot of damage. So the reason I like this one is because if you don't have this one, when you use this skill, it just auto parries, which is useful. But if you have focused parry, you can specifically time it for the best moment, which I find to be extremely useful. And again, not only do you want to get the skill, but you want to try using it a lot in combat because of how effective it is. So that's the second one I have for dual wielding. The next one I want to talk about is Twin Vipers. And so Twin Vipers is the throwing ability, or the best throwing ability with lightsabers, at least for the dual wielding stance. So you hold LB and then you press and Y, and then press Y again to throw the second blade. So when you do that, you hold LB, you tap Y to throw the first one, and you tap Y again to throw the second one. And it does a lot of damage. This one is great again against single opponents. It's not very strong against groups like some of the other saber throw abilities, but if you're trying to fight an enemy, especially one that likes to keep their distance until they lunge at you with like an unblockable attack, this one is really, really useful for that, because you can quickly do 2 high damage strikes to them that are almost always really effective. So those are the 3 most important skills that I recommend. Obviously, I recommend you get them all, but those are the 3 that I find most useful in combat, especially in this pairing for dual wielding. Now let's move on to the double bladed. So again, with double bladed, I again recommend getting them all, but certain ones are more important than others. Again, the first one is going to be one that is extremely effective in combat, and that one is called Gathering Tempest. And so for this one, you hold X to deal fast strikes towards a single enemy. So this one is a very useful basic attack. Instead of just tapping X, you hold it, and it isn't as good as a lot of the double-bladed attacks against group stuff, but as far as one single target, it does work pretty dang effectively. Only downside is sometimes you will miss with several of those strikes because the targeting on these longer moves doesn't seem all that good. But that being said, I still use this one a lot in combat because it's very effective. The next one is straight up the line, and it's Endless Hurricane. This one says continue pressing X to add additional attacks to the end of the double-bladed chain attack. So this one is it's just a large improvement over the regular tapping one, because if you continue to do it, eventually you're going to get to the point where you do this kind of flipping attack where you really swing and do a lot of strikes all at once, and it just adds to the max damage effect that you can do with your basic double-bladed lightsaber combo. So I find Endless Hurricane to be very useful to use in combat, and I use it a lot. Then the next one is Multifold Reflections. This one's great for large group combat, especially with lots of ranged enemies, because it's the single best one at reflecting blaster bolts, especially a lot of them all coming at once. Basically, you just hit LB right before the blaster shots connect, and you hold onto it, and it will reflect all of them back. So especially as you see in the little animation there, against the heavy gunners who shoot a lot at once, then it's really effective, but really against any ranged enemies, it's going to be extremely useful. Then of course, down to the right side, we have Vortex Dive. For this one, you hold LB and then you press X to dive forward, and you're going to spin the lightsaber while you do it. This one is useful for 2 things. A, it's a useful attack that you can use against single opponents or groups and can deal a decent amount of damage, but B, it's just really good for closing the distance between you and your enemy very, very quickly, and typically in a way that will stagger them and deal damage. So I find Vortex Dive to be one that I use quite a bit. And lastly, the next one up from there is Double Orbit, and that's another one that I use a lot. So Double Orbit, after you've done the first lightsaber throw, if you press it again, you can do this big circular lightsaber throw around you that can hit multiple enemies. This is just another example of how the Saber Staff is extremely good at crowd control. This is one that I use a lot when I find myself surrounded by either the little animals that, you know, are annoyingly persistent, or like stormtroopers, droids, anything like that. I find the Double Orbit to be extremely useful there. So again, like I always say, you're going to want to get all of the perks or all of the skills for both dual wielding and double-bladed saber stances if you're going to use them most effectively, but those ones are the ones that I find myself using in combat with this combination the most frequently. As far as perks go for this, there are 4 that I recommend with this combination, and I do it for various reasons. So the first one is Fortitude. It increases your damage output with a lightsaber, but it increases incoming damage as well. So this one is one-sided. It does both things, so you obviously have a positive and a negative, but the damage increase to your lightsaber is like 50%, and I want to say your incoming damage increase is only like 20%. So you definitely get a bigger upside than a downside with this one, and considering that this stance combination relies on a lot of rapid strikes, that increase to your damage output is going to be huge, because the strikes themselves don't do as much damage as, say, a single saber stance or the crossguard stance would per strike, but you do them much more rapidly. So if you can increase that damage, it's going to make them extremely effective. So Fortitude's an obvious choice for me. The next one is Versatility. This one is where you deal extra damage temporarily after switching lightsaber stances. The reason this one is another one that is an absolute no-brainer is because when I'm using this combination, I switch between stances a lot. And so I'm almost constantly in a state of increased damage because I'm constantly switching back and forth between the dual wield and double-bladed stance as needed in combat. So that one is going to be a huge boost if you switch a lot. The next one is Shatter. This one increases your block meter damage, so every strike you do against an enemy, if they're blocking you, this will make those strikes deal more damage and wear down their meter faster. Again, it's going to be very important because the way that these stances work is by wearing that down nice and quickly so you can finish them easily, and this just makes that quicker and easier. And finally, Resilience is just a base increase to your block meter. This one's essential because the dual wielding stance, despite being extremely good in duels, actually has the lowest block meter starting out, whereas this one brings it up to pretty much on par with all of the other stances. So if you have Resilience, then the dual wielding stance is easily the best single opponent dueling stance in the entire game. So those are the 4 perks that I for sure recommend using if you're going to use this stance combination and try to get the most effective results out of it. And that's really all there is to say about this combination. Like I've said, in my opinion and in actual fact, because I am the arbiter of all that is true and good, this combination is the single best saber stance combination out of anything currently in Jedi Survivor. There are other stances that are quite good, like the blaster stance and the single-bladed stance, or the single-bladed stance, or the double-bladed stance and the crossguard stance, but none of them come as close to being extremely overpowered as the saber staff and dual-wielding stances do. So that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed this video and found it entertaining, but in any case, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.